Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is Three Theater. And Avengers Endgame turned my brain to sludge. It wiped me out. It kicked my ass. I couldn't do anything yesterday. I just stayed at home and played video games and was like, I'm just thinking about this movie because it was a culmination of 11 years of storytelling, something that truly does mean a lot to me. And I came out of it and I just been on my brain ever since. But one of the big problems that came from the thinking about it yesterday was really thinking about some of the plot holes. And there were a fair amount of plot holes in that movie, and I do hope they address them. But I also feel that it was entirely possible that the Russo brothers and the writers wrote themselves into a bit of a corner and couldn't think of a very good way to get out of it. So they just kind of heavily relied on movie logic as a way to not only wrap up the story, but to then get them out of the hole they were in. There was no real MacGuffin, there was no Chekhov's gun, so to speak, but there were elements that plopped up that were kind of like, what, really? Like, okay. And you don't really catch it right away because in the movie, in that moment, the first time you see it, there's a lot there going on and you're trying to process everything. A lot happens in 3 hours and 58 seconds. It's an insane amount of stuff. So there is going to be spoilers abound, just so we guys know. But I figure at this point, probably most of you would have seen it, considering it's already at $1.5 billion in the first couple days. Yeah, it's an insane movie. So let me talk about the snapping. So the snapping was a great way to end Infinity War, right? With the whole thing coming together, Thanos getting what he wanted, Thanos, decimating half of all life in the universe in order to prevent overpopulation. And it was, then showing us the trailers from the movie and showing us how things had passed and how life had moved on, or at least attempted to move on, and how humanity was kind of dealing with it. We didn't get a lot of scenes with it, but what we did get were some nice choice scenes of our heroes, of our main characters kind of dealing with it and the regret that they feel, especially after Thor killed Thanos and then, realize that they're just screwed. They're absolutely screwed. So when at the end of the movie, Tony Stark sacrifices himself and brings, when Hulk, this goes on Hulk, when Hulk brings everybody back, there's a couple problems with that. For one, it's been 5 years and no time had passed for the people who were dusted. That to me was interesting. It makes a lot of sense because there was a theory that they ended up going to another plane of existence, like the snap split the universe, or it split the timeline or something like that. And that would actually be a very interesting theory, considering the fact that, well, we learned because of the time travel situation that when they go back, they create alternate timelines. So the alternate timeline could have happened when the snap hit, and that would have been probably a more valid way of trying to explain it for where they've been. But instead, 5 years have passed, everyone came back, and Hawkeye's phone rings, and it's his wife. She's been gone for 5 years. She's had a dead cell phone plan for 5 years. He's probably had a dead cell phone plan for 5 years. Like, he's off the grid. How would he have his cell phone on him? But yet she was able to call. That was a bit of a plot hole because, obviously it was meant to showcase that she's back. It was meant to showcase that everything he had gone through was worth it. Scarlett Johansson's death was worth it. I understand the emotional resonance for that scene, but the movie logic there kind of goes out the window when you actually give it like just half a second of thought. That to me was an issue. Never mind the fact that you also have the aftermath from the snap. Now, one of the things I enjoyed about the MCU shows on Netflix, right, the Marvel shows on Netflix, was that they kind of dealt with the post of the attack on New York. Now, they called it the incident. They referred to the Avengers. They referred to these characters and what was happening as a result of trying to rebuild New York. In fact, that was actually a big whole plot of season 1 of Daredevil, which I thought was really good. But in this time around, it's been 5 years. So out of half the population that's left, what is going to happen? What is going to happen when people come home and they go like, oh, there's Dean, and Dean survived, but Martha didn't. Martha's been gone for 5 years. Dean got remarried, had another kid, and now here comes his wife, and she's like, hey, honey, I'm home. And like no time had passed. And that's going to be a very fascinating thing to look at. Whether or not it gets explored in future films or future stories is going to be up for grabs. And that's not as much maybe of a plot hole as it is a lingering question that didn't get the opportunity need to be discussed. And I feel like that was something that they should have discussed. I know this was a very character-driven thing, but they established the world. There was a lot of world building in this, but without the conclusions, the wrap-ups of what the results of that would be. And that to me was a bit of a problem. I felt like even though the movie had an insane runtime already, those kind of things being left out is definitely one that well, quite frankly, I feel is a little bit on the lazy side, left open to interpretation. But, this is the Marvel universe. Nothing is really ever left open to interpretation. We wanted plot holes kind of wrapped up. That was actually one of the things the Russos had said, is that plot holes for Infinity War and Endgame were going to, or previous films that had plot holes, were going to have that, wrapped up in these movies, and they weren't really wrapped up, all of them at least. The Red Skull one was clearly the biggest one, obviously, and I'm glad that they brought him back for this, for Endgame for a little bit. But again, what about when Captain America goes and returns the Soul Stone to Vormir? No, that's the thing. We'll talk about it here in a second, though. But really, what I would have liked to have seen is the explanation for the world repairing itself. Is there going to be, because now keep in mind that they've had 5 years of half the world, which means that food production has dropped down. They even made a line in the movie about how the rivers were cleaner. Because there's less pollution, there's less people. Basically, kind of showcasing what Thanos was wanting to do was worthwhile, and the essence of it protecting the planet, protecting the species. And that was one of the weird factors, is that, everyone wanted those people to come back, but there were benefits. So I want to see the aftermath of that, of the decimation, and then everyone coming home, and they're all of a sudden now being 3.5 billion more people to feed, and whether or not the food can actually come back. You know what I mean? Whether or not the resources are going to be there. And that would be a very interesting thing for maybe some criminal underworld stuff, or some of the small scale stories to deal with those kind of people. But again, that to me is a real big problem. And then you've got Spider-Man in high school, because we know that Flash didn't get snapped, right? Flash survived the snap. So it would have been 5 years. Why is Flash in high school, and why are they on a trip to Europe in Spider-Man Far From Home? That is, unless Spider-Man Far From Home ultimately ends up taking place before the events of Infinity War. Now, Amy Pascal did say that it takes place 4 minutes after the events of Avengers Endgame, but that could be changed, just how, Homecoming dealt with its own really messed up timeline in the current MCU. And we now know they can mess with timelines, so I'm wondering if Far From Home is going to be something set in an alternate New York, in an alternate future that didn't see the events from Endgame. And that, of course, itself is another problem, because these are setups for things that are supposed to be interconnected. The whole deal with Sony and Spider-Man was interconnectivity, and I'm really hoping that they find a way to explain it, and not just put 8 years later, which bungles the whole time frame in regards to Spider-Man Homecoming. But that could also then prove that Spider-Man Homecoming was ultimately not set in this timeline, even though we know that it was. It's a weird thing. There's a lot of weird things in the MCU leading up to this point, but I also acknowledge, before there's also making your comments here, I also acknowledge that there's, it's a movie for one. Movie logic plays into a lot of it. It's a long movie. They had a lot to do. They ultimately concluded it in a very satisfying way, 100%. But there's those little nagging elements, those little threads that I start thinking about. And that to me is a pretty big problem, because those are not what you want to start thinking about once the movie is over. And it does feel that way. Again, there's the whole situation with Captain America, him going back in time and replacing all of the stones as to not screw with the timeline. Now, the question then becomes, how did he replace them? Did he replace them where he got them from? So did he put the Aether back in Jane Foster in Asgard? I know he replaced Mjolnir. That was the whole point of him taking Mjolnir back. Did he go back into the old base and reconstruct the Tesseract and put it back inside the SHIELD facility? What about Vormir? Did he go and battle Red Skull? Where is that conversation? Where is Red Skull seeing Captain America show up and go, oh shit? Where was that conversation? Where there are so many things with that. There are so many things. What would be Captain America talking with the Ancient One? What would that be like? Would her be going oh, I see that Stephen Strange did his job. He did a good job. Cool beans. I'm glad I didn't screw this one up, right? Because she had made that comment to Hulk about about all of that, right? So there's a lot of, then of course he goes back and he stays with Peggy for 80 years roughly. And it was just good. He had a nice long life with her. I'm assuming she died when she died back in 2016. And, he was a 100 plus year old man at that point. And that was a good scene. That was a good goodbye to Captain America and everything. But there's so many, like, what timeline was he in that led him to that moment? If going back in time doesn't alter the future, did he go to like some alternate universe? Did he get to a point and then did he come back down? Those are questions that I have and that are just like, I know I'm not going to get the answer I want. I know I'm not going to get the answer that I want on that one. And that is unfortunate, but it's one of those things where it's like, God damn it. I really wish that there was an answer, because when they spend like the time heist sections in the movie talking about this stuff and breaking it down, but then to just kind of be caught up in the rules of it, so to speak, or bogged down by the details. Even though ultimately the devil is in the details, especially if you're trying to put out there a conceivable idea. But there was also, the Mobius strip, which, I mean, in the theory of that ultimately is, you could alter anything in that timeline, in the past timelines, and while they might branch off, it doesn't affect your particular future. So that's kind of what they're explaining with that. But at the same time, they should have done more to explain it rather than like leaving people to go and look up YouTube videos about, Mobius strips and time travel and things like that. I mean, hey, it's a good way to get kids interested in science, but it really does leave the audience questioning a great deal. So there's a lot in Endgame that is 100% perfect, but it's some of those little moments that I feel are really going to be like that nagging question in the back of people's minds going forward. And I really do hope that they come out and address it in future movies, and they address some of the problems, and they might. I think Kevin Feige probably will, but it's just, it's one of those things where it just kind of gets you, makes you really think about it. Now, here's how I would have done it personally. I would have gone back. I wouldn't have done the Mobius strip and the branching things. I would have gone back and gone back to at the Battle of Wakanda, and had Thor go for the head and take him out there and stop him there and keep the snap from happening and keep it set in 2018 in order to effectively keep everything the way it is. And then like Thor going back and saving Loki. And then, or maybe they go back and they kill Thanos on the ship. They kill Thanos where Infinity War began, saving Loki, saving Heimdall, and then Spider-Man Far From Home picks up in the movie where he's on the bus going to the airport, which is maybe perhaps where he was when Infinity War started. But also, I do question this one real quick. Was Happy Hogan and Aunt May, were they snapped? Because we do know that they're in some kind of relationship. And the question then becomes, were they in a relationship for 5 years before Spider-Man came back, and they don't want to tell him because they're afraid to tell him because they don't know how he's going to feel about it now that Stark is no longer around? There's so many questions. But here's the thing. What if I'm wrong on anything? Please explain it to me. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm so curious to know. Also, is there anything that I missed? Anything that you caught that was a little bit weird? Again, this doesn't take away from my love of the movie. I think the movie's fantastic. I think it's great. I can't wait to see it again. It melted my brain for yesterday, but now I'm kind of thinking about it, and I'd love to go watch it again. But your thoughts, your opinions, please let me know. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.